Hi, everyone. Welcome to Azure User Group Sweden. Happy weekend. Hi, Okan.
Hello, Jonah. Happy weekend to you too.
Yes, and to those that are joining us live today, sitting on your couch or wherever, thank you for joining us this lunchtime to learn with us, especially with our session today about RBAC in Microsoft Defender. So, yes. So, how are you doing, Håkan,
Yeah, it's
this weekend?
pretty good. It starts to become much more lighter in the day, which I'm looking forward
Yes.
to.
Yeah. Today we got some sun actually. I see that you have a sun there behind
Yes.
you. Yes, that's right. So, yeah, so before we start, let me just introduce to those that are like first time that you watch us today. Let me introduce my co-community leader here, Håkan Silvernagel. He is MVP for a Microsoft MVP for AI technology. He works as a manager for big data and AI at Miles in Oslo. And he is also very active as an international public speaker and community leader of different communities in Norway, such as the Oslo AI community and even the Norwegian.net user group and an AI school called AI 42. So it's an honor to collaborate with Håkan since we started this community during the pandemic. Actually, it started. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
Håkan.
thank you so much, Jonah. So it's also a pleasure and honor for me to introduce Jonah Anderson. So she is the founder of Azure User Group Sweden, and in addition, she is also a Microsoft Azure MVP. And in her daily work, she works as a cloud infrastructure and DevOps engineer at Forefront Consulting in Sundsvall, Sweden. She is also a Microsoft certified trainer, an international speaker, a mentor, blogger, podcaster, and also an author for a great book that is soon to be released. What
Yes,
is it
thank
about,
you.
Jonah? What is the book
It's
about?
about it's about Asher, of course.
Oh.
Yes, that's right. Yes, and we have people saying hi to us today. So we have Majid, we have Nico saying hi from Malmo. Finally, they got snow. We have Stefan and also Urus with us. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. And before we introduce and bring our speaker today, let me just share to everyone about our code of conduct. So, Azure User Group Sweden is a community that expects everyone to be nice and friendly. When you're communicating sending your comments to our live chat or even in our after session fika, listen with purpose and be thoughtful when you communicate. Be respectful, seek to understand and not criticize others in the community. Be curious and open to share your ideas about the topic that we're discussing about, and be inclusive in your comments and questions, especially in the public live chat. All right. So if you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to me and Håkan as well. And do you want to share about our uh, learner badge, Håkan, today?
Yes. Yeah, so today you have the chance here to get a free Microsoft Learner Badge, and you can also continue learning about, securing your Azure resources with Azure Role-Based Access Control if you go to this bit.ly link that you can see here. And to get the Learner Badge, you just need to scan this QR code that you can see here on the screen. And we also can offer you a Microsoft backpack for the one who is asking technical questions. So you just ask many technical questions and be active here, and then you increase your chances of winning the backpack.
Thank you, Håkan. And we also have an after session, like a 15-20 minute discussion with the speaker. If you ran out of time and you have something that you want to personally ask our speaker, if our speaker has time, you can also join with us.
Yes.
Okay, is it
Yes.
time to bring our guests?
Yes. So let me introduce here Viktor Hedberg. So Viktor is a security consultant with a focus on Microsoft security, either on-premise or in the cloud, and he is a blue teamer at heart. He has worked within IT for the past 10 years within cybersecurity, and he's working for the public sector in Sweden for 4 years, but now he's a specialist in Truesec AB, focusing on proactive security measures, DFIR, and advices on all things cyber. Welcome, Viktor.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. And as you can see, my little RGB lists are blue because I like doing blue things. So
Yes.
for those of you who are not aware, the blue side of cybersecurity are the defenders, and the red side are the simulated attackers. So,
okay. Yes.
Okay.
And you have an attacker there behind you. It's your like a chair. It's red.
Yeah, exactly. So that's actually a chair that my 5-year-old son used to sit on when he's like, "Hey, Dad, can I sit in your office while you're on meetings?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, whatever."
Yes.
I love the chair.
Yes, that's great.
Won't
You're
understand
also
it.
from you're joining us from Sweden, Viktor, right?
Yep.
We're speaking English right now, but where in Sweden are you based from?
So I'm initially from Norrköping, in well, it's like 200 kilometers from Stockholm, ish, south, and since 2018 I've been living in a small community called Reftele, which is it's basically on the border between Halland and Jönköpings län in Sweden.
Okay.
So
interesting.
it's in the southwest of Småland.
Småland. Okay. Yes.
So for
interesting.
those of you who are not Swedish, this is total gibberish, but yeah.
Yes, it's not so often. We usually have international speakers like joining us virtually, and I love it when there's like from Sweden as well joining us, sharing to the community. Yes. So yeah. So today you will be sharing a great session, and I'm also interested in that. So do you want to, should we go ahead and get on the session, you think?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to introduce myself and give a little bit more detail on what I do. So as previously, and as the banner says, I'm Viktor Hedberg. I work at a company called Truesec. You can see on my sleeve here the Truesec logo. So basically what we do is everything within cybersecurity. So from proactive measures, reactive measures in form of our security operations center, and of course our cybersecurity incident response team as well. And we also do a lot of like pen testing, offensive security, those types of things. So it's really a really cool company, if you ask me. And I get to work with some of my idols growing up, getting into tech. So Michael Nystrom, Hassan Al-Jakarti, those guys are really close friends now, and it's kind of cool to go from a nerdy little kid like, oh, these guys are so cool, they talk about these cool things, and now they're asking me for help, and that's I mean,
that's great.
Yes. Yeah, it's big, in a different sense.
Yeah, I'm interested to learn more about Truesec company, what you do, because security is very like high in demand today in any infrastructure. So great to have this session.
I was up until like 20 to 1 this morning, helping out in an incident response. So things happen all the time.
Yes,
big companies, small companies. I mean, breaches will happen. It's just a matter of time.
Yes, it's good to be prepared for that. So that's why we need more guys like you, Viktor. Guys or girls.
Yeah.
Yes.
All
right.
More security people. So
yes. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I mean, no, maybe you have something more to say. Sorry.
I was just going to say that, and on the topic of proactive security, I'm going to share with you guys today a session about implementing role-based access control in Microsoft Defender. Now, I have seen a couple of posts on social media about, oh, here's how to listen to this session about to use Azure RBAC in Microsoft 365 Defender, and that is incorrect. So we're not going to talk about Azure RBAC, but we are going to talk about Azure Active Directory and how to utilize the groups inside Azure Active Directory to implement role-based access control in Microsoft 365 Defender.
Okay, that's great clarification. I was also confused there when you said when it was the title of the RBAC there, but thank you for that.
Yeah,
That's
but
great.
I mean the same kind of mentality that I'm going to show you in Microsoft 365 Defender can be extended to Azure RBAC as well.
Okay, that's great. Okay, should we bring Viktor's presentation here?
Bring up my screen.
All right. The stage is yours, Viktor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, as the title says, implementing RBAC in Microsoft 365 Defender, the built-in roles are not for everyone. So, what is the issue with Microsoft 365 Defender and the privileged roles that are natively built into Azure Active Directory? Well, the global admins, the security admins, the privileged role admin roles inside of Azure Active Directory, these are all roles that have some sort of control over your Microsoft 365 Defender stack. So if you're a global admin, you can use everything inside of Microsoft 365 Defender. You can perform live response sessions towards devices or endpoints that are onboarded to Defender for Endpoint. You can reconfigure the security settings for Defender for Cloud apps, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Identity, whatever. You're basically you have the keys to the kingdom, right? And this goes for the Azure plane as well, because a global admin can always elevate themselves into the user access administrator role inside of all Azure subscriptions. And you want to keep those roles to as few people as possible, of course, because you don't want to hand out the keys to the kingdom to everyone who needs administrative access in Azure Active Directory or in any Azure platform at all. So the big issue right there is that they're overprivileged in the sense that they can do everything, and we want to try to implement a role-based system where you can actually say that, hey, this user can only do certain things. As I said, it does not give granular control. It's basically an all or nothing kind of deal. So either you're an admin or you're not. And of course, there is the global reader and the security reader, but those tend to break when you implement role-based access control anyways. Now, what are the risks surrounding this? We have seen a couple of incidents where a threat actor has gained access to a global admin account, either via a cloud solutions partner like a CSP, jumping into the tenant using backdoors and spinning up a couple of hundred really high performance virtual machines to use as crypto miners, and the customer is stuck with a hefty invoice from Microsoft saying that, hey, you need to pay for your Azure resources. So this actually happens quite a lot, and there are a couple of things to know about when it comes to the global admins in Azure or security admins. But one of the risks, rogue admins, like we don't talk enough about the threat that might come from internal. So if you have a disgruntled employee, we're actually seeing a lot of focus on Sweden from a threat intelligence and human threat intelligence perspective from a certain state in Europe. Well, it's basically in Europe and Asia at the same time, this time of year. And it's initiating a giant conflict in the Ukraine. So I think you know which country I'm talking about without saying the name of them. But we're seeing a lot of attention towards Sweden on the cyber level and on the human threat intelligence level as well. So when we're talking about rogue admins, it could be someone from inside the company. Account takeover, of course, like your global admin account gets breached. We can have a session stealing going on. So instead of a regular phishing email where you get like, hey, enter your username and password, and the password then gets dumped, you can actually see that, hey, they're stealing the session token and the cookies for that particular session, thereby bypassing your multi-factor authentication policies as well. Business email compromise. I mean, it still happens using brute force, password sprays. focusing primarily on the legacy authentication APIs in your Azure tenant. So we do have a couple of legacy authentication protocols for services like SharePoint Online and Exchange Online. Those are getting deprecated soon enough. I think that Microsoft has actually pulled the plug on most of them, but there are still a couple of APIs that accept just username and password. And if you just get the username correct, you can then start trying to hammer away with different password combinations to see, okay, now I have valid passwords. And from there on, you can then go into the session stealing phase, or the prompt abuse phase, if you will. Privilege escalation as well. So there are a couple of ways to escalate yourself into higher privileged roles inside of Azure. So if you compromise like a service principal that has a lot of API permissions, it can be used to create a new global admin account or elevate another one into an admin account, or you can just use the service principal as the entity for performing certain tasks. So like a policy security.policy read all or read write all can do anything with your conditional access framework, which is kind of scary. So how can we mitigate this, focusing on the admin accounts sort of thing? So implementing role-based access control is one of them. And that's what I'm going to show you later on. But there are also a couple of other things. So the role-based access control rely heavily in my setup of using privileged access groups, also known as PAGs or role assignable groups. So basically a security group within Azure where you can assign, you tag it as this group can be assigned to roles. And why is that important? Well, the PAGs limit the fact that not everyone can administer that particular group anymore. So you need to be a global admin, you need to be a privileged role admin, or a group owner to actually add members to that group. Because if you just use regular security groups, your user access administrator, your help desk admin, your groups admin can still interfere with the memberships inside of this group. So we want to use the role assignable groups as much as possible when constructing a secure role-based access control setup. And this also applies to Azure resources. So if you want to use role-based access control in an Azure, try to use, if you're going to use groups, which I recommend because it's easier than having to, select multiple users to different roles, please use the role assignable groups because they are more strictly controlled and can't be manipulated that easily, at least. But in Microsoft 365 Defender, we can actually create custom roles nowadays. I was preparing for this session the other week, and Microsoft was like, "Hey, we're global general availability or public preview for the unified RBAC model within Microsoft 365 Defender." So I was like, "Oh, okay, I need to rewrite my session, or at least rethink what I'm talking about," because the setup was quite different previously. But now we can create custom roles, which is great. And I'm going to show you guys how to do that later on. Protecting the admin accounts. I cannot stress this enough. For at least your Azure AD directory roles, use privileged access workstations and filter on device ID in your conditional access policy, saying that, hey, if you're a global admin, you can only sign into the cloud apps using this particular device, because that eliminates the threat of like session stealing, phishing attempts and stuff like that, because you're narrowing down the vector from where the admin account can actually sign in. So if you're saying that, hey, you can only come from this device, any like session stealing, whatever, you can't spoof the device ID that simply inside of conditional access. So yeah, let's head into the demo, because I've talked now for like 20 minutes and I haven't really showed you anything yet. So let's do that instead. So here we have my Azure Active Directory tenant. Is the sizing okay, or do you need me to zoom in a little bit? Yeah, it seems fine. I guess. I'll zoom in a little bit just in case. So first thing first, I'm going to talk about using privileged identity management and these privileged access groups in tandem. So from a licensing perspective, you need to be on a P2 level to use privileged identity management. But if you don't have the P2 license for Azure AD, you can still implement role-based access control. You just can't use privileged identity management. So you need to rely on, just using the role assignable groups for this kind of setup. So if we start with creating a role assignable group, we can actually see that this is the switch that I'm talking about. So Azure AD roles can be assigned to this group. Now, once that switch gets toggled to yes rather than no, the membership type is always assigned. You can't use dynamic groups for this setup. And that is because you need to have a human interaction. So it needs to be an admin or a group owner actually adding people into this group as they go along. So we'll give it an appropriate name, an appropriate description, but we won't actually give it any Azure Active Directory roles. We're just creating a role assignable group, which we can then use inside of Microsoft 365 Defender. So let's go ahead and create this. Yeah, once you've set it as a role assignable group, you can't actually make it into a non-role assignable group. But let's see where we got that one. No, it's not showing up yet. The demo gods are not with me. Oh, here we go. Perfect. Now we want to enable Azure AD PIM for this group on the member level. So once we've enabled it, we actually need to head back there and click here again. And now we can edit the settings. So on members, we can say that when you go through the privileged identity management process to elevate yourself into being a member of this group, how long should you be a member for? So like 8 hours, that's fine. We require use of Azure MFA, the required justification on activation. Now, this is a hot topic for many companies. I also have it set up in my demo environment, and it kind of annoys me every time I need to go through it. But if you want to implement this, please have your admins on board, because otherwise it's going to be like when you're turning off a Windows server. Why do you need to turn it off? Reason other generic failure, or the standard one. So assignments. Do we allow permanent eligible assignments, or are we just going to use time-based eligible assignments for this group? Now, in most companies, you would allow permanent eligible assignments because, well, your security operations team, they are usually around your company for a long time. So you want to keep them in these groups during their entire employment, basically. Now, we don't want to have any permanent active assignments on these types of groups that we're going to use in the role-based access control, because any type of break glass account, any type of global admin account outside of these groups should be kept separate. So we're not gonna hassle with those ones here. If you want to set up any role assignment alerts, it's basically the same thing as when you go through the PIM of issuing Azure AD roles or Azure roles. This is just focusing on the groups rather than the roles built into Azure. And let's go ahead and update this. So, okay, in order to become a member of this group, you actually need to have an eligible assignment of this group now. So let's see. No, there's no one here. We can say that, okay, we need to select a member. So Charlie Chaplin can become an eligible member of this group, like that. And it's permanently eligible. And let's go ahead and assign it. So that's the first step. We've configured our privileged group. Now let's head into the security portal to actually create the role which we're going to assign to this group. So in the Microsoft 365 Defender portal, let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit, like that. You can actually create custom roles nowadays. So you'll see under permissions, previously this one wasn't here, called Microsoft 365 Defender. Now it is in public preview, so it's not, if you're afraid of using public preview features, just note that this is in public preview, but it's still supported to use. You will get support from Microsoft if you have any troubles with it. So I urge you to use it if you're using Microsoft 365 Defender. Now, the funny thing here is that if we have set up like a role-based access control in previous workloads, such as Defender for Identity or Defender for Endpoints or Defender for Office 365, we can actually import those roles into this kind of setup. So let's see what we have in Identity. What roles do we want to import into our Microsoft 365 Defender Unified RBAC model? So we have this is the group that gets created when you install or enable Defender for Identity in your tenant. So we can actually just, hey, we want to keep things as is. And here we go. So we're dragging that one from Azure Active Directory directly into our Microsoft 365 Defender. And yeah, that's one of the ways of doing it. But what we're going to look at here is creating a custom role. So we'll call this role something generic. Demo AZ Yugi Sweden. Now permissions. This is the permissions part. So we can select read only, read and manage permissions, or we can select custom permissions based on what we want the role to be able to do. So dependent on what role you're configuring, because we're getting to on the next step when it comes to what kind of workloads we're going to use this role for. You have different options basically. So we can say that, hey, you can manage alerts. Security data basics read is always required, sadly. But okay, so this role, you can actually just manage the alerts that pop into Microsoft 365 Defender. If you're using Defender for Endpoint, you'll see that you have a couple of other permission possibilities with like live response, basic live response, and responses. Like if you want to allow the Microsoft 365 Defender for Endpoint to actually perform mitigating actions on any given alert. So if we go ahead and apply this, and we head next, here's where we add the group we previously created. AZUG Sweden. And here's the funny part, where we can actually differentiate between different Defender products. So this role, as we configured it, it gives you the ability to act on alerts inside of Microsoft 365 Defender. But we're going to uncheck this box, for instance, and say that, hey, this only applies for Microsoft Defender for Identity. So if you're a member of this role group, you can only act on alerts inside of Microsoft Defender for Identity. Now let's add it to the demo group we created. Hit next. we get a quick review screen, and we submit it. And there you have it. You have created your first role inside of Microsoft 365 Defender in one of the more secure ways you could do it. So let me just check on the... No questions yet. Okay, we'll keep on burning. So as I said, the same kind of setup can be used on Azure resources. So you can actually use this privileged role group to assign permissions to your Azure subscriptions, if you will. I can actually show you how to do that. Let's see here. So Azure resources. Sorry. Roles, sorry. No. Oh, come on. Where did they move this? Ah, there we go. Discover. I've implemented PIM for my own Azure subscriptions, and I can't. Anyways, you can use these role groups to implement role-based access control based on the Azure RBAC roles as well. I did not prepare for this. That's why I'm struggling to find the settings right now. But the same kind of setup still applies. So if you want to keep your Azure subscriptions role access controls as secure as possible, please use these types of assignments rather than specific users, because that tends to be unmanageable in the long run. Now, we also talked about the conditional access part. So how do we make sure that our admins or that our newly created admin role group members only can sign in from specific devices? Now, this is in conditional access, where we use a conditional access policy to say that, okay, in order for a global administrator, in this case, to sign into my Azure tenant like at all, you need to come from a specific device. I do have some exclusions on my break-glass account and my own account, but that's because when I was demoing this on another conference, I almost locked myself out of my environment, which would have been quite bad, because then I had to prove to Microsoft that I own this tenant, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, the conditions for this: filter for devices, as you can see here. This policy is quite generic. So it's basically saying that if you're a global administrator, or using this kind of setup for the RBAC part, if you're a member of this group, you're blocked from accessing the Azure portal or any other interface, because it's listed as all cloud apps. So all the APIs, PowerShell, whatever, they get blocked unless you're coming from this particular device ID. Now, this device ID is one of the devices inside of my Azure Active Directory, which is Azure AD joined. So it actually is a simulated virtual privileged access workstation. So if we search for that device ID, we can see that, okay, and global admin needs to come from this particular device. Otherwise, you won't be able to access the Azure workloads or Microsoft 365 workloads at all. Now, if you don't want to go the PAW track, I still recommend you guys to do that, because it really elevates your security posture in the cloud, since you can actually use the conditional access to target other workloads as well. So your AWS instance, your GCP instance, since you can use conditional access and Azure Active Directory as the identity provider, that's a real good way of securing your cloud interfaces. But if you don't want to go that far just yet, you can actually use public IP ranges, because that also helps with protecting you guys against the threat of session stealing, malware, or phishing. So we have seen a couple of instances, as I talked about earlier. Like it looks like a Microsoft sign-in page. The only thing that differs is the URL. Even the reset my password or forgot my password link works. The branding is on point, so it looks like a legit sign-in page. But the only thing that it does is that it steals your session and initiates a new session from the host itself, which tends to be a machine in Azure for some reason. So the threat actors are actually using Azure to attack your Azure tenant. Because how would you differentiate between the different sign-ins in the sign-in logs? If you don't want to use the public IP addresses or the IP ranges to whitelist privileged activity inside of Azure, you can require the in conditional access, you can actually require a stronger authentication method than you require multi-factor authentication, because as I've said, multi-factor authentication isn't enough, at least not for admins. And in some cases, even not for end users, because if your CEO of the company is only requiring MFA to sign in, that session can be stolen and another user can act as your CEO. Now, if you require the authentication strength instead for particular users, you can say that phishing resistant MFA, in terms of how Microsoft sees things, is the most secure way of accessing your Azure infrastructure. So using one of these babies, like your YubiKeys or Windows Hello for Business, stuff like that, that also eliminates the threat of session stealing. So let's see, what else do we have to talk about? So we talked about implementing the role-based access control structure inside of Microsoft 365 Defender. It was real quick, but do you have any questions? Feel free to use the chat. I know I get quite excited and I tend to ramble on real quick when I talk about things that excites me. So feel free to ask any questions you may or may not have. But using privileged access groups, create your custom roles and try to use conditional access to limit how these admins, either your Azure AD admins or your Microsoft 365 Defender admins or Azure admins, are allowed to sign in to, or are allowed to use their roles inside of Azure, and of course the conditional access part as well. So limit how they can sign in. And as we talked about prior to the session, like if you think that you won't get attacked, you're probably naive, or you are naive, because these attacks are happening all the time throughout these kind of workloads. And one of the bigger reasons that you want to secure your Microsoft 365 Defender if you're running Defender for Endpoint is live response sessions. So let's talk real quick about that, just to say, hey, what is live response and what can you do with it? So if we're looking in Defender for Endpoints, I think we got a question. Is it possible to assign more than one device to the conditional access? Yes, it is. So you can add as many devices as you will in that conditional access policy. I do urge you to use Azure AD joined devices only, not hybrid joined, because we don't want to interfere with the on-premises Active Directory. So the PAW discussion in general is a much larger topic on how we recommend you guys to do that. But basically, what would we say about the PAWs? So for a typical admin, the short version would be, okay, I have a quite powerful workstation where I use virtual machines as my PAWs. So one of these virtual machines would then be my Azure PAW, which that particular virtual machine would be joined to Azure Active Directory, but it has no connection to on-premises infrastructure. Do you have any examples of roles in Defender that would make sense to have in a smaller organizations where basically everyone that use Defender portals are admins at least part-time? In smaller organizations, I would say, like, if you're using Microsoft 365 Defender in smaller organizations and you don't have any like security operations center capabilities, you need to look at how to get some sort of security operations center capabilities, because these portals, although they're nice and shiny, they tend to fire off alerts when something is happening. And if someone isn't looking at that screen like 24/7, 365, you'll miss things happening. So these kinds of setups with the role-based access control, those are more aligned towards the guys that are, or the enterprises or businesses that are running like a security operations center. And if you aren't running a security operations center because you're a really small business, talk to some company, Truesec, or someone else that has that offering. Is my recommendation basically, because if you have like 5 admins because your company is that small, it doesn't really make sense to break it down even more, because they won't be able to accept those kind of ways of working basically. Is the new phishing MFA features available for CLI access to Azure also? So if you target the conditional access policy to apply to all cloud apps, it should cover Azure CLI, is my gut feeling. I don't know for sure. I don't use Azure CLI like at all, but I know that the Azure management apps, you can select that in conditional access. I think that does not cover the Azure CLI, but if you select all cloud apps, since Azure CLI is actually a cloud app in itself, the conditional access policy should cover that. Now back to quickly to live response and why this could be an issue. So live response is a way for a security operations center like level 2, level 3 to actually contact the affected device or endpoint and grab data from it. You can even run custom scripts, stuff like that, directly on the endpoint. Now, if you have your on-premises domain controllers in Defender for endpoint, and you have live response for servers activated, congratulations, your global admins and your security admins are now also domain admins, because they can perform live response sessions towards your domain controllers. Just saying. So we're always talking about, hey, you need to use cloud-only accounts for administrative purposes in the cloud, and you should only use on-premises admin accounts for on-prem, stuff like that. Come on, let's be real. Hybrid isn't going anywhere. I know we're on the Azure user group in Sweden, but hybrid infrastructure is still going to be a big thing for the coming like 20 years, I'd say, something like that. But live response is a big, it's not an issue per se, but it's a big it's a big threat vector. So if I get global admin permissions inside of your tenant and you have domain controllers inside of Defender for Endpoint, I'm also probably one of your domain admins by now, because I can execute stuff using live response as in the system context of that domain controller. So I can create GPOs, I can add people to domain admins, I can steal password hashes or tickets or whatever. So we want to try to break that as much as possible. And that's why we recommend, if you think of a deployment lifecycle, so we have 100 days, which is your operations lifecycle. Let's put it that way. So day 1 is where you create new stuff, and day 100 is where you decommission that stuff. Those are actually the only 2 occasions where you need to be like a global admin or a security admin or a domain admin for on-prem. Everything, day 2 through day 99, that is something you should use a more streamlined access for. So instead of using your global admin account to do stuff, you should use a more role-based access control kind of way. So to summarize, let's head back here. The use of privileged access groups or role assignable groups is incredibly important for the reasons that I mentioned previously. It limits the admin rights to that particular groups, so that only global admins or privileged role admins or the owner of that group can actually add new members. Because when we talked about rogue admins, so maybe your help desk admin account get breached, and you have implemented some sort of role-based access control towards Azure resources or your Microsoft 365 Defender resources. Now, the help desk admin account can actually add people to that security group, but it can't do that if it's a role assignable group. Custom roles in Microsoft 365 Defender, if you're paranoid or you have specific teams working with alerts for specific workloads, and you don't want everyone to be able to see everything within Microsoft 365 Defender, use custom roles to say that, hey, you can only work with alerts from this workload. Okay, you're on the Defender for Office 365 team. You can only work with those kind of alerts. The basic read properties will still apply on the entire workspace in Microsoft 365 Defender. So if you are assigned any kind of admin role, you will have basic read permissions on all endpoints, policies, user accounts, cloud apps, etc., etc. And as we said, using privileged access workstations, the quick demo or the quick example I got, like having a more powerful workstation where you can have multiple virtual machines. So you have one virtual machine for your day-to-day activities, and your email, your Teams, etc. You have one virtual machine for your on-premises infrastructure. You have one virtual machine for Azure stuff if you're going to sign in as global admin. So that's how we recommend you to do this, because that's the only way to really make sure that your infrastructure stays as safe as possible. And with that, I'm actually done with this presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now, or I will be in the little Zoom meeting afterwards as well. So if you have any questions, please take them with you. Hey, we got a question. What are your recommended best practices how to think about setting up and monitor a break glass account? Now, we do have a couple of minutes left, so let's just jump into the Azure portal and I can show you instead of talking. So in my environment, I do have a break glass account, which is called like BRK something something something. Yeah, here we go. Demo break glass. So this account is a cloud-only account. it's permanently assigned to the global admin role, meaning that it doesn't have to jump through privileged identity management to gain access into your Azure portal. And this is the only account, or well, one of the 2 accounts on my PAW policy, but this is otherwise the only account that is totally excluded from any conditional access policy or any identity protection policy or anything like that. This account can be used anywhere from any device, anytime, provided that it uses this security key. Because it has like a 128 character long password, which I generated and forgot. So the only way to sign in using this account is by using this security key. So monitoring this account, well, you could use a couple of different tools. You could use log analytics, setting up an alert rule for whenever this account gets is signing in. You'll fire off an alert saying that, hey, this account was used. You could use Microsoft Sentinel to do the same kind of configure an alert policy for that as well. We can actually use a custom detection inside of Azure Microsoft 365 Defender nowadays, because we have a couple of APIs here. You see the AAD sign-in events beta. So AAD sign-in events beta, where account object ID equals your break glass account, that will trigger an alert. Now the custom detections only run once an hour, based on that's the shortest time frame you can configure it for. But there are a couple of ways to handle these break glass accounts. But to summarize, a cloud-only account, exclude it from your conditional access policies requiring MFA, excluding from your PAW policy requiring a specific device, exclude it from all security measures, basically, and implement or use a FIDO2 key in order to sign in with that account. Give it a long, complex password that you don't know, and make sure to track where this key is at all times. It should be kept in a safe where you need physical access to gain access to that particular account. Okay. Any other questions?
I can, yes. Hi. Let's.
Hi.
Yes, thank you so much for the great session. I was like looking at your screen and present the demo all the time, and very great questions we have from our audience as well. Yes, do you have questions, Okan?
No, I thought it was a great session here.
Yes, it is.
Maybe one thing, Viktor, maybe you could just repeat it, because I thought it was a very nice principle. The thing that you said about the day 1 and day 100.
Yeah. So that basically applies to any operations inside of infrastructure, development, whatever. So on day 1, when you build something new, that's really when you need to use your really high privileged accounts or high privileged entities to do stuff. You build the solution. On day 2 towards day 99, where you're in the operations phase, you don't need to use that higher privileged account. You can make do with a more limited admin account. Like if you talked about the Microsoft tiering model, like a tier 1 account, you can only do specific things on application servers or whatever. And on day 100, when we decommission the solution, that's where you need the highest privileged again.
Okay. Yes.
So take that with you and try to think about that when you're doing stuff either in Azure or on-prem.
Yeah. Is this like documented somewhere? It would be good to share it to the community. Is it like an official docs about this day 1 to 100? It's interesting. I would like to learn about
it's more,
it.
it's a recommendation coming from us at Truesec, basically, because we see like in I don't want to say 100%, but like in 90, 97, 98% of all the breaches that we're investigating, you're overusing your privileges throughout the infrastructure. So domain admins are signing in everywhere. Your global admins are signing in from everywhere because it's easy. It just works. You don't have to think about it.
Yes.
And then I think maybe a lot of times people think that, I'm just going to do this just once, but then that never happens. So then I don't bother to set up, an account with less privileges. But then
Exactly.
it doesn't just occur once; it happens many times.
And you like the it's always easy to remember to ask for permissions, right? It's not as easy to say, hey, lower my permissions. Because if you have the highest level of permissions, why would you bother with getting anything less? Because you can do everything, right? So yeah, it's a tough question. It's a tough mindset to wrap your head around.
Yes.
Now I've been schooled since I started at Truesec, and yeah.
Yes, I have a question. I mean, this is really like makes me think deep in my mind because I work with cloud infrastructure. I'm like an Azure administrator for my client as a consultant, and I sometimes when you see these things in the infrastructure, you see this missing pieces that should have been better in terms of security. So if I were first in the enterprise or organization perspective, if I was an organization that's struggling with cybersecurity in my infrastructure, on-prem, hybrid, or in the cloud, what's your best advice to get started and make it right from the beginning?
So, of course, I wanted to say like talk to us. We can help you, but I mean when we talk about cybersecurity, like these things that I showed you in Azure, like of course they're bright new and shiny, but basically they just revolve around basic security hygiene. So we want to limit how an admin can access different workloads. And that's something that a lot of companies have forgotten about or never actually worried about because, well, hey, I used to do it like this, and then someone else get hired and they get trained by the old grumpy IT people. It just, yeah. So how to get started with this is look at these old topics like tiering. How do we segment different workloads from one another, making sure that only specific user accounts can do specific things on specific servers? When we're talking about the cloud, make sure to look at how's your permission model looking. So implement I keep forgetting the name, but like the Microsoft Enterprise something, keep it in different subscriptions basically, and try to limit the possibility of jumping from one subscription into the other, and be very wary about the things like overusing your privileges basically. Like your global admins can always elevate themselves into every one of your Azure subscriptions. So if you have something really secret, you might want to put it in a different tenant altogether. Yes. Secure score in Defender, yeah, sure. If you use Defender, absolutely. It gives you a lot of these like low-hanging fruits inside of your infrastructure. So if you just look at my secure score, I know the devices are low because, well, it's a lab environment. I don't really have to care that much about it. But aside from the ASR parts, like the attack surface reductions, if you scroll down, you'll see like, hey, you should enable local security authority protection. So once again, look at, okay, what features do we have that are natively present inside of the Windows operating system? Turn those on, like the LSA protection. What's it called? There's a lot of features inside of the Windows operating system that are there. You can use them. It doesn't cost you anything. Same for like App Locker, WDAC. That's all part of the operating system. So start by taking a step back, stop looking at, hey, we need to implement a next generation firewall or a really expensive CM solution, because that doesn't help. I'm sorry, but it doesn't. Because if your core infrastructure is misconfigured, it won't stop a threat actor, because they will find a way. And what they really want is like your backups and your hypervisors. So take a step back, look at, hey, what did Microsoft recommend for hybrid stuff or on-prem, and take a good look at that, like the security baselines for GPOs is one good example of how to configure your operating systems a good way.
Yes, great. I have a lot of questions actually, but I think we're out of time. I was thinking about I'm both a developer and DevOps, working with DevOps infrastructure, and there's in terms of security, I think it should also start in the beginning, like this concept of shift left. I think you're familiar with that also, Viktor.
Yep.
It should start in the development phase already, not do it after when you're already
exactly.
in production. Yes.
And I know developers tend to be like, hey, I need to be local admin on this system. Yeah, of course, we can fix that. But you will only be local admin on that particular system.
Yes.
We want to try to limit the possibility of your developer admin account being used anywhere else. So actually, the better way of, if you want to have local admin permissions on like a server or a workstation, use a local one, not a domain one. Containment is super important.
Yes, agree. And that's something I do in my job. So it's really important to be strict about this, because when things happen, it's not easy to handle it. We need guys like you to help in organizations.
We see this on a regular basis. Like you have a group which is local admin on all of your servers. Everyone's not a domain admin. Yeah, but you just invented domain admin by creating this group and this GPO. So if it's a little bit difficult for you to administer your environment, it's probably a good thing.
Yes, that's great. Yes. All right. I think I won't ask more questions. I don't consume most of our time.
We can do that in the Zoom call. It's fine.
Yes, maybe I can share my my questions later on in a different session. But yes, I don't have anything else, and I don't think we have more questions from others. But we do have some appreciation from our community for you, Viktor. Thanks for the great session. It was insightful from Nikos. Majid also said thanks, and we also have Gabriel today saying thank you for the great session. And
thank you for having me.
Yes, and to everyone, I'm gonna post something in the chat today. So we will be having like a short after session, like discussion via Zoom. So if you are available in the next 15 minutes, feel free to join us and even Viktor, Håkan via Zoom.
Yep.
All right. Anything else on your side, Håkan?
No, just thank you so much for a great session, Viktor.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, thank you.
It's really eye-opening.
Yeah, it's. I'm not intentionally trying to scare you.
No,
just a little bit, you know.
just a little bit. Yes. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope that you have a great weekend. See you in the next 2 weeks, and in the next session, by the way, we will be having our next speaker, Emily Lundblad. And she will be sharing about open AI with Microsoft and cognitive services. So we also look forward to learn more about it next session. So register for that next one. And thank you so much again, Viktor. Tack så mycket på svenska.
You're welcome.
All right.
Varsågod.
Yeah, tack själv. Ses sen. All right. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.